I guess this is the part where I lay it all out. No sugarcoating, no holding back. I found out my wife, Emily, had been cheating on me with multiple men. It wasn't like one of those moments where you discover something small and piece it together over time. No, this hit me like a goddamn freight train. At first, I couldn't even process how deep it all went. But trust me, the betrayal cuts deeper than you can imagine. You think you know someone, right? You build a life together, share everything, and then boom, it all falls apart. Let me backtrack for a second. I met Emily during our uni days. God, she was everything back then. Funny, smart, driven. She had that smile, the kind that pulls you in, and you can't help but get lost in it. We were at some party, those wild nights where everyone's trying to drink away their student loans, and she just stood out. I remember thinking she was it for me. We clicked right away. Our conversations flowed like we'd known each other forever, and we talked about everything. Our dreams, our future, what we wanted out of life. It was one of those perfect moments, you know? One you never forget. Fast forward a few years, we got married. It was a small ceremony, nothing too extravagant. I didn't care much for the whole wedding circus, and neither did she. At least, that's what I thought. Life was good for a while, and I don't know when things started to shift, but looking back, I realized there were signs. They always say hindsight is 20/20ths, right? It started small, late nights at work, more girls' nights out. And suddenly, she had all these new friends I'd never met. The first few times, I didn't think much of it. She was ambitious, and her job as a project manager kept her busy. But then, she started coming home drunk more often, which was weird because Emily was never much of a drinker. At least, not before. I'd ask her about it, and she'd brush it off, telling me it was work stress or just one of those nights. At first, I wanted to believe her. I did. But when you're lying in bed, night after night, waiting for someone who used to be excited to come home, and now she's stumbling in at 2 or 3 in the morning reeking of booze and God knows what else, you start to question things. You start snooping, because what else can you do when your gut's telling you something's off, but she's telling you it's all in your head? I'd see her texting late at night, laughing at messages, and hiding her phone when I walked into the room. She'd tell me it was just the girls, but it didn't feel right. There was always that nagging feeling at the back of my mind, the kind that keeps you up at night, wondering what the hell is going on when the person you thought you knew inside out starts becoming a stranger. One night, she passed out after another night with the girls. This time, I couldn't take it anymore. I'm not proud of it, but I grabbed her phone. The thing is, she never let me touch it before, always had an excuse like work stuff or confidential projects. But I'd figured out her passcode weeks ago, just hadn't had the balls to check it until then. And yeah, I knew I was crossing a line, but at that moment, I didn't care. I needed answers. I unlock it, my hands shaking like crazy. First, it's just texts. Harmless at first glance, right? A bunch of group messages with her friends, some work stuff. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize, Rob. And right after that, Dave. Okay, I thought maybe just some coworkers. But then I kept scrolling and my heart dropped. Photos. Videos. Jesus Christ, I'll never forget that feeling. My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself as I scrolled through them. It wasn't just one guy. There were multiple. Fucking multiple. And these weren't just flirty texts or innocent selfies. These were full-on videos of her at some kind of party. A party I sure as hell wasn't invited to. Group sex parties. Man, I didn't know. Doing things with my wife I never imagined she'd be into. I thought I knew her. How wrong I was. Every new image was like a fresh stab in the gut. And by the time I put the phone down, I was shaking so badly. I thought I might throw up. I looked over at her, passed out like nothing was wrong, while my entire world was disintegrating in front of me. I didn't wake her. I couldn't. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the fuck had happened to my life. How did we get here? Was it my fault? Had I pushed her into this? Was I so clueless that I didn't even see it coming? Or had she always been like this, and I just blinded myself to it because I wanted to believe in the fantasy we built together? The thing is, once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. It changes everything. And the anger? It starts as this slow burn in your chest, but before long, it's consuming you. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to break everything in sight. But I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the fight that was coming. Instead, I spent the rest of that night trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I've heard people say revenge isn't worth it, that it won't make you feel any better in the end. Well, they're full of shit. After discovering what Emily had been doing behind my back, the only thing keeping me from going insane was the thought of getting back at her. I knew it had to be personal. It wasn't enough to just leave her or expose her. No, I wanted her to feel that same pain, that gut-wrenching twist in your stomach when you realize everything you trusted was a lie. That's when the idea of Catherine came to mind. Yeah, Emily's mother. Catherine was, well, let's just say she aged like fine wine. She was still married to Emily's dad, but their marriage had been on the rocks for a while. Emily mentioned it in passing, something about them not really being in love anymore, just going through the motions for the sake of appearances. Perfect. It started slow, subtle. I didn't want to rush anything. I knew I had to play the long game with this one. After all, Catherine was no fool. She'd seen her share of life, been through her own battles, and I couldn't afford to spook her. So, I began positioning myself as the supportive son-in-law. After all, I had to keep up appearances while I planned my move. We'd meet for family dinners, just casual things. I'd offer to help her with little things around the house, or we'd grab a coffee now and then, talking about how tough things were for both of us. And, of course, I played the part of the heartbroken husband like a pro. I dropped little hints about my troubles with Emily, how I felt distant from her, how I didn't understand why our marriage was falling apart. Catherine, being the nurturing type, ate that shit up. She started opening up to me about her own issues with Emily's dad, how she felt lonely, unappreciated. It was like clockwork. The more she opened up, the closer we got. Then came the perfect moment. One evening, I suggested we meet up for dinner, just the two of us. Nothing unusual, right? After all, she'd been my confidant these past few months, and I was so grateful for her support. We went to a nice, quiet place. I could see she was flattered. I played it cool, kept the conversation light at first, but as the wine flowed, things started to shift. She was talking about her marriage problems, how she felt trapped, how she missed feeling desired. That was my in. I leaned in, and I'll never forget the look in her eyes when I brushed her hand, just barely. She didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned in a little too. It was all too easy. After another bottle of wine, I suggested we head back to her place. I made sure to keep my tone casual, like it was just another night. But inside, I was boiling with a mix of anger and excitement. This was it. When we got back to her place, it didn't take long before things escalated. A few more drinks, some lingering touches, and suddenly we were on the couch, kissing like teenagers. It wasn't some romantic, passionate thing. No, it was raw, fueled by years of frustration on her part and my need to get back at Emily. In the back of my mind, I felt this twisted satisfaction. Every move, every touch, it was all part of the plan. I don't know if Catherine even knew what she was getting into. Hell, maybe she did. Maybe she wanted it just as much. Either way, that night I got what I wanted. We ended up in her bed, and I'll spare the details, but let's just say revenge can feel pretty damn good when you're angry enough. The next morning, Catherine acted like it was some big secret, like she was suddenly guilty about what we'd done. She kept saying how no one can ever know, and how it shouldn't have happened. But I wasn't interested in her guilt. I didn't care about what she thought or how she felt. For me, it was just step one of the plan. A few days later, I decided it was time to drop the bomb on Emily. I wasn't going to be subtle about it. No, I wanted her to feel the full weight of what had happened. So, I waited until we were sitting at the kitchen table, just a regular evening after work. She was on her phone, probably texting one of her many friends from those sick parties she went to. I had to fight back the urge to throw her phone across the room. Instead, I leaned back and said, as calmly as I could, "I slept with your mother." You know that moment when someone's world completely shatters? I saw it happen right there in front of me. Emily froze, her eyes wide, like she couldn't process what I'd just said. She stammered, trying to form words, but all that came out was, "What? That's not. You're lying." I smiled. "Oh, I'm not." We had dinner, a few drinks, and then, well, you know how these things go. I could see the anger starting to rise in her. She wanted to lash out, to scream, but she was too stunned to move. So I twisted the knife a little deeper. "If you want details, I'm happy to share." She jumped up from the table, her face red with fury. "You're fucking disgusting," she screamed, her voice cracking. "How could you do that? My mother? You're sick." I stood up too, leaning over the table. "Am I?" I spat back. "What about you, Emily? Huh? How many guys have you fucked behind my back? You think I don't know? Group sex parties? Really? Who's the sick one here?" The room was filled with this heavy silence, broken only by her labored breathing. I could see the realization setting in. She knew I was serious. She knew I wasn't bluffing. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. I didn't give her the chance to recover. "Yeah, Emily, I know everything. Every disgusting detail. And guess what? Your mother? She's better than you." That was it. She snapped. She threw her phone at me, screaming every insult she could think of, but I just stood there, calm as ever. She was losing control, and I'd never felt more in control of the situation. This was the revenge I wanted. I wanted her to feel that same humiliation, that same betrayal. As she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, I felt satisfied. It was twisted, sure, but after everything she'd done, it felt right. Once the dust settled after my little revelation about Catherine, I knew what my next move had to be. Divorce. It wasn't even a question. I couldn't stay married to someone like Emily, not after what I'd seen, not after what I'd done. This marriage had been a sham for God knows how long, and now it was time to burn it all down. But I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. No, I had evidence, solid damning evidence, and I was going to use every bit of it to make sure she never forgot what she did to me. The first step was getting a lawyer. I wasn't playing around. I needed someone ruthless, someone who would go for the throat, and I found just the guy. This shark of a divorce attorney named Harris. He didn't ask a lot of questions, just wanted to see the evidence I had. So, I handed him the videos, the photos, everything I'd gathered from her phone. I'll never forget the look on his face when he opened the files. It was like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Well," he said after a long pause, "I think we've got more than enough to bury her." And that's exactly what we did. Filing for divorce wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be, but it was a necessary step. I wanted out of this mess, and I wanted to take as much with me as possible. So we started compiling everything, every video, every text, every receipt that showed Emily was living this double life. I wasn't just out for revenge anymore. I was going for full destruction. I wanted her to be humiliated, to lose everything she thought she could hide behind. When the court proceedings started, it was like stepping into a gladiator arena. Emily showed up, looking like she hadn't slept in days, probably because she knew what was coming. But I didn't give a shit. She'd done this to herself. She had the nerve to act all innocent, though, like she hadn't been caught red-handed screwing multiple guys behind my back. She sat there with her lawyer, this sleazy guy who tried to paint her as the victim, saying she'd made mistakes and that our marriage had fallen apart over time. Yeah, no shit. But those weren't mistakes. Those were choices she made over and over again. The tension in the courtroom was thick. Every time her lawyer tried to spin some sob story about how we'd grown apart, I'd watch the judge's face. He wasn't buying it. Not when we had the kind of evidence we did. When it was my turn to present the videos, I made sure they were played in full view of everyone in that room. I wanted them to see the real Emily, not the innocent wife she was trying to play. And let me tell you, it was a show. Emily sat there, pale as a ghost, as the videos played. The sounds, the images, there was no denying what she'd done. You could see the horror on her face as everyone watched. It was fucking priceless. Her lawyer kept trying to object, saying it was too personal or irrelevant, but the judge didn't stop it. He let it all play out minute by minute. By the time it was over, Emily looked like she was going to be sick. She knew there was no way out of this. I testified too, of course. I laid it all out. The late nights, the lies, the hidden phone, the group sex parties. I told the court how I found out, how I confronted her, how she had the audacity to deny it at first. And the whole time, Emily just sat there, staring at the floor, unable to even look at me. The court battle lasted longer than I expected, with Emily's lawyer trying every trick in the book to paint her as the victim, but the evidence was too strong. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I got the house, most of our assets, and a clean break from the woman who destroyed our marriage. It was a win, but it didn't feel as good as I thought it would. Maybe because, deep down, I knew there was more I could do. That's when I decided to take it one step further. You see, just getting a court ruling wasn't enough. I wanted everyone to know who Emily really was. I wanted her life to implode the way mine had. So, after the ruling, I took those videos, the ones from her phone, and I uploaded them to an anonymous website. Don't ask me which one. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. It was one of those shady sites where people share all kinds of messed up stuff, and within hours, the videos were spreading like wildfire. I sat back and watched it all happen. I watched the views climb, the comments pour in, and I felt this strange sense of satisfaction wash over me. Emily had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that her dirty little secret was now out there for the world to see. And that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted her to feel the humiliation, the shame, the loss of control. It didn't take long for the news to spread. I heard whispers from mutual friends, saw posts online, people were talking. Emily was becoming infamous, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her work found out, too. Turns out being a project manager and starring in group sex videos doesn't exactly mix well. I didn't have to do anything after that. Her life just unraveled on its own. People started distancing themselves from her. She lost her job, and eventually, even her new friends from those parties didn't want anything to do with her. And you know what? I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. She had it coming. All of it. That night, after watching the fallout unfold, I slept better than I had in months. There was something oddly peaceful about knowing she'd finally gotten what she deserved. I didn't care if it made me a bad person. At that point, I'd stopped caring about a lot of things. All I cared about was making sure she paid for what she did. And she did, in full. After everything that went down, the court battle, the videos, the fallout, I knew I had to get my shit together. You can only live in revenge mode for so long before it starts eating you alive. So, I made a decision. It was time to rebuild, to focus on myself for once. No more thinking about Emily or what happened. I wanted to move on, even if I wasn't entirely sure how to do it. First thing I did was start exercising. I'd never been the gym rat type, but I needed something to burn off the anger, the frustration. Every morning, I'd hit the gym, running on that treadmill like I was trying to outrun my own thoughts. At first, it was just about getting through the day without feeling like I was about to explode, but slowly, it became something more. I started to enjoy it. I pushed myself harder, lifting weights, running further. And you know what? It helped. Physically, I felt better, stronger, like I was in control of something again. And that was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. Then I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Visiting new places, picking up old hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage. I always loved photography, but somewhere along the way, I'd stopped taking pictures. Emily wasn't into it, so it just kind of faded away. But now, I had all the time in the world, so I dusted off my old camera and started going on these weekend trips. Sometimes I just drive without a plan, stopping wherever looked interesting, snapping photos of landscapes, people, random moments. It was like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten. But no matter how much I tried to fill my days with new things, the past still lingered. At night, When everything was quiet, my mind would drift back to Emily. I'd replay the good times, the memories of when we were happy. It wasn't all bad, you know? We had moments, genuine moments, where I thought we had it all. And that's the hardest part. It's not like everything was terrible from the start. There was a time when I loved her, when I thought she was my forever. But all of that was overshadowed by what she did, by the lies and the betrayal. I'd lie awake, thinking about how things could have been different. What if I'd caught on sooner? What if I'd been a better husband? But those thoughts are poison. You can't change the past, no matter how many times you go over it in your head. It's like standing in front of a wrecked car, wondering what would have happened if you'd taken a different road. The crash still happened. You just have to deal with the aftermath. One day at work, I met Sophia. She was new to the office, fresh out of some marketing firm in another city. We started talking. At first, just casual work stuff, but then we started finding common ground. She was into photography too, and we'd share stories about places we'd been, the kind of shots we liked to take. There was something easy about talking to her, something that felt safe. But even though I was drawn to her, there was this wall inside me. I couldn't let her in, not completely. I'd been burned too badly, and the idea of opening up to someone again scared the hell out of me. Every time I thought about letting my guard down, I'd hear that little voice in the back of my head, reminding me of what happened with Emily, reminding me that trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's damn near impossible to rebuild. Sophia was patient, though. She didn't push. We'd hang out after work sometimes, grabbing a drink or two, talking about everything and nothing. And slowly, I felt myself loosening up around her. I could be myself, without the weight of everything that happened dragging me down. She wasn't like Emily. At least I hoped she wasn't. But still, that fear held me back. In the middle of all this, Tom, my best friend, was a constant. We'd been through thick and thin together. And after everything with Emily, he was there for me in ways I didn't even realize I needed. He'd call me up on weekends, drag me out of the house, even if I wasn't in the mood. He'd push me to try new things, to meet new people, to stop wallowing in the past. I owe him for that. If it weren't for Tom, I probably would have just drowned myself in bitterness and regret. One night, after a few too many beers, Tom gave me the tough love talk I didn't want but definitely needed. We were sitting at some dive bar, watching a game, when he looked over at me and said, "Dude, you've got to stop living in the past. Emily's gone. It's over. You got to start thinking about what's next." I shrugged it off at first, but he wasn't letting it go. "I mean it, Jack. You're a good guy. You deserve better than to let that bitch ruin the rest of your life. You got to move on, man. Meet someone new. Live your life." And for the first time in a while, I actually thought about what he was saying. He was right. I couldn't keep letting Emily's betrayal define me. Yeah, it happened. Yeah, it fucking hurt. But I was still here. I was still standing. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start looking forward instead of back. Sophia and I started hanging out more after that. It wasn't anything serious at first, just friends, just talking. But I could feel the connection growing little by little. She had this way of making me forget about everything else, even if it was just for a moment. I wasn't ready to jump into anything yet, but for the first time since the whole nightmare with Emily, I felt like maybe I could. The fear was still there, though. Trusting someone again? That was a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. But with Sophia, I didn't feel rushed. She let me go at my own pace, never pushing, never expecting more than I was ready to give. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Building trust again is harder than I thought it would be. After everything that happened with Emily, it's like there's this invisible barrier I can't get past. But with Sophia, something feels different. She's patient, and I don't feel like I have to rush into anything. We started opening up more, talking about real stuff, our pasts, our mistakes, the things that shaped us. It wasn't easy for me to go there, to dig into the parts of my life I'd been trying to bury. But with her, it didn't feel as overwhelming. Maybe because she never judged, never pushed me to be something I wasn't. It was one of those nights after work, just the two of us sitting in some quiet corner of a cafe. I hadn't planned on opening up, but it just came spilling out, the whole story. The betrayal, the court battle, the videos, everything. I expected her to react, maybe look at me differently after knowing the mess I'd been through. But she just listened, nodding every now and then, giving me space to get it all out. And when I finally finished, all she said was, "That must have been hell for you." It caught me off guard. No pity, no lectures, just understanding. It was like a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying had lifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't defined by what Emily had done. Maybe there was more to me than just the guy who got screwed over. Sophia and I kept growing closer after that. It wasn't some fairy tale romance, not by a long shot. We took things slow, sometimes painfully slow. There were days when I'd retreat into myself, when the memories of Emily would come back like a tidal wave, pulling me under. Those moments when I'd remember the good times, the times when I thought everything was fine. It was like trying to scrub a stain that just wouldn't come off. No matter how much I tried to focus on the present, the past kept creeping in, reminding me of what I'd lost, of the person I used to be before it all went to shit. One night, lying in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, going through those old memories like I had so many times before. It was always the same reel. Emily's laugh, the way she used to look at me, the plans we made. And then the sharp turn, the betrayal, the lies, and the downfall. I hated that those memories still had power over me. I hated that she still occupied space in my head after everything. It made me wonder if I'd ever truly be free of it, if I could ever really move on without dragging that baggage into my future. Sophia noticed it too. She could tell when I'd start to pull away, when the ghosts of my past would take over. "You don't have to go through this alone," she told me one night after I'd been distant for a few days. "Whatever it is you're feeling, it's okay. Just don't shut me out." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't that I didn't want to let her in. I did. But letting her in meant confronting parts of myself I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The anger, the hurt, the fear that maybe I wasn't capable of being in a relationship anymore. That maybe, deep down, I was just as broken as Emily had left me. But I didn't want to be that guy anymore. I didn't want to be stuck in the past, constantly replaying the worst parts of my life like some kind of punishment. I knew if I kept living like that, I'd never find any real peace. I'd just keep circling back to the same mistakes, the same doubts, the same pain. So, I made a choice. I decided to face it, to deal with all the shit I'd been avoiding. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd always thought was for other people, not me. But I needed it. I needed someone to help me untangle the mess in my head, to make sense of the chaos. And slowly, session by session, I started to understand what had been holding me back. It wasn't just the betrayal that had screwed me up. It was the way I'd lost trust in myself. I'd ignored the signs with Emily, brushed off my own instincts because I didn't want to face the truth. I didn't want to believe that the person I loved could do something so awful. And now with Sophia, I was terrified of making the same mistake. Terrified of trusting someone again, only to end up in the same place, broken and bitter. But through therapy, I started to see things differently. I realized that trusting someone doesn't mean ignoring the risks. It means understanding that, yeah, things might go wrong, but that doesn't mean they will. It's about taking that leap even when you're scared. And more than that, it's about trusting myself. Trusting that I've learned from the past, that I won't ignore the signs again. It wasn't easy. Hell, it still isn't. There are days when I catch myself slipping, when those old fears come creeping back, whispering that maybe I'm not cut out for this, that maybe I'm destined to screw things up. But now, I know how to push through it. I know that those voices don't control me. I do. Sophia and I had a long conversation one night, after I'd been feeling particularly off. I told her everything. How scared I was, how I didn't know if I could ever fully trust again. She didn't get upset or frustrated. She just listened the way she always does. And when I was done, she said something that stuck with me. We can figure this out together. It doesn't have to be perfect right away. We'll figure it out one step at a time. That's when I knew. I knew I wanted to try. I wanted to open my heart again, even if it scared me. Because at the end of the day, what's the alternative? Living in fear and bitterness? I'd done that long enough, and it nearly destroyed me. It wasn't just about Sophia, though. It was about me. I had to come to terms with my past, accept it for what it was, and let it go. I wasn't going to let Emily's actions define me anymore. I wasn't going to keep carrying that weight around like a badge of honor. I started making plans. Small ones at first, weekend trips with Sophia, talking about where we saw ourselves in a few years, what we wanted out of life. But it was more than that. It was the beginning of something new, a future that wasn't dictated by my past, but shaped by what I wanted, by who I wanted to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again. The thing about hitting rock bottom is that eventually there's nowhere to go but up. And after everything, Emily's betrayal, the divorce, the anger, the bitterness, I realized I'd finally reached that point where I was ready to climb back up. But this time, I wasn't doing it alone. I had Sophia, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually see a future. A real one. It wasn't some epiphany that hit me all at once. It was gradual, like waking up from a long, dark sleep. One day, I just knew. I was ready to move on, to stop letting the past define me. I was ready to start something new with her. Sophia wasn't just someone who helped me through the tough times. She becomes someone I wanted to build a life with. And that's a hell of a realization after everything I'd been through. We started talking more seriously about our future, laying it all out on the table. It wasn't easy at first, given all my hang-ups, but the more we talked, the more I realized we were on the same page. We both wanted the same things: stability, trust, happiness. But we didn't just talk about the abstract stuff. We got specific. Where we wanted to live, how we saw ourselves growing, what we wanted from each other. It was refreshing having someone who was just as invested in building a future as I was. One night, after a long conversation about our dreams and goals, I made the final decision. I was ready to commit, not just to Sophia, but to the idea that I could be happy again, that I could have a life filled with hope instead of resentment. I told her as much, and the relief on her face was all I needed to know I was making the right choice. We were in this together now, and it felt damn good. I wanted to mark this new beginning in some way, something symbolic to officially close the chapter on my past. So I decided to organize a small dinner. Nothing fancy, just a gathering of close friends, a few people who had been there for me through it all. Tom, of course, was the first one I invited. Without him, I'm not sure I'd have made it this far. I owed him that much. At that dinner, I felt lighter than I had in years. We toasted to new beginnings, to letting go of the past, and to the future. For the first time, I wasn't just going through the motions. I actually believed it. I believed that I could leave everything that had happened with Emily behind and start fresh, with a clear mind and a full heart. It was cathartic in a way. Saying goodbye to that part of my life wasn't easy, but it was necessary. After the dinner, Sophia and I went for a walk. It had become our thing, walking through the park, just talking, no distractions. That night, it felt different. It felt final, like I was truly stepping into something new. We walked side by side, reminiscing about how we met, how far we'd come since then. I told her how much she meant to me, how she had helped me in ways she probably didn't even realize. And for the first time, I felt like I could actually breathe, like the weight of the past had finally lifted. As we walked, I looked over at her, and I knew. This was it. This was the life I wanted, the person I wanted to be with. I wasn't holding on to the anger or the pain anymore. I wasn't letting the ghost of Emily haunt me. I'd finally found peace. At some point during the walk, Sophia took my hand, and we just kept going. No words, no need for them. We both knew what this moment meant. It was a quiet, simple kind of happiness, the kind I didn't think I'd ever have again. But here I was, walking through the park with the woman I cared about, looking forward instead of back. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hopeful. I was ready to move forward, to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I wasn't alone. It was a new beginning, and for the first time in years, I could honestly say I was excited about the future.